This is my YZ250FX, really nice bike. I like it a lot. It does everything I need it to. Great on the trails, on the track, and every place I would use it. The only thing that was a little bit less than what I would have liked is for this model year, the factory skid plate didn't have as much coverage as I'd like. It's strong and protectant and better than aluminum because it doesn't reflect as much sound. It's a little bit more resilient, but had three little areas where I didn't like it as much. One is that this area here is quite open for the frame, and it would collect a lot of mud, which increased the weight while you're riding and also made cleaning more difficult. But that was easy enough to fix. I just cut out the top of a container lid and attached it with some zip ties, and that managed to do for quite a while. A different problem though is that although it covers the frame rails nicely, so you can avoid damage to the rails from rocks and logs, one thing it doesn't really cover is this radiator hose. And unfortunately on my last ride, either an errant branch or a rock or something snagged it and punctured the hose, so I lost coolant, and that's when I finally figured it out because the engine was overheating. That was the end of that ride. This is the hose that I had to replace, and as you can see it got punctured, and with the high pressure involved that allowed all the coolant to get shot out, and then my engine started overheating, and that was the end of that ride. So a little bit of protection here and for the water pump would be something of an improvement. So I wanted to do something to improve that situation. Also, if you look at the water pump cover just above the impeller, you can see that it took a hit as well from not being protected, and so I had to push out a little dent in the pipe, and I also had to dig out a little bit of the edge that was crushed in there just so that the pipe could come out and I could clean the O-ring and stuff. And then the third area is down underneath, and you can see from this angle that it doesn't really cover as much of the rear suspension components as you'd like. So for the linkage, you can see that it's all exposed, able to be hit by rocks and logs during crossings. And if you look at the bottom of the shock body, you can see that there are quite a few little dings from hitting various objects or sliding over them, and so it would be nice if that was more protected. So with that in mind, I wanted to make a new skid plate or glide plate that had a little bit more coverage, so something that wouldn't let the dirt in around the front of the frame, something that would protect the radiator hoses and the water pump, and also provide something that would give a little bit of protection when gliding over rocks or logs for the shock and the linkage. The first thing I did when deciding to build the new skid plate is to take off the original one. So this also gives you a better idea of how much of the front of the frame was left open without that little extension. But I took off this skid plate. So after taking off the factory skid plate, I got a piece of cardboard and laid it out flat, and then took off the factory skid plate and laid it down on the cardboard and basically traced the outline going front to back, just so I could get the proper shape, get the hole locations, and also over to the sides by rotating it, and basically got that layout. Once I had the cardboard cutout with some additional space for larger pieces, I actually used the 2 front bolt holes and bolted it onto the mounting points on the frame. From that, I bent the cardboard and made cutouts so that it could bend to follow the curvature of the frame the way the original skid plate did. And I also had an extension at the back so that it could cover the linkage. From that, once it was bolted on, then I put the bike up on a center stand and fine-tuned the layout of where I wanted the cuts and how I wanted the coverage to go. And from that, I was able to then put score marks in the sheet of polyethylene for where the bends would go, a score mark down the center line, and then 3 more scores for where I wanted to do the bending. And then once I cut that out, mainly using a table saw and a drill bit for the joints or the meeting points of the cuts, and also for the inside radius of where pieces needed to curve. Then I took it and used a heat gun to do some of the preliminary bending, just to get it onto the bike so that I could then do some fine-tuning with bending and marking for where to cut. Once that was done, I put the bike up on a center stand just to have it exactly the correct shape, and then did the fine-tuning. So what came out of that was this piece that I'm going to show you now, which is basically this. So one of the things that I had to do is that, because the rear mounting point is raised a little bit from the frame rails, I had to cut out 2 pieces with a hole saw from some of the scrap Ultra High Molecluar Weight polyethylene, just to make enough of a bridge so that the screw would have something tight to go against. And once the skid plate or glide plate was on the bike, then I was able to do some additional forming, bend it a little bit more, make some additional cuts, and just basically clean up the edges. I left the gaps from where the pieces go together just so that airflow could get in. Makes it a little bit more resilient too, so it's more likely to move slightly rather than hang up on something, even though this is much more slippery than aluminum or even some other forms of polyethylene and polyurethane. Let's see what else. For the screw in the bottom, I ended up using a button head screw. It's almost flush, but in case that does seem to have some issues, then what I'm going to do is put in a countersunk flathead screw, which I already have in the same size. It's an M6 screw, 30 millimeters in length, fairly easy to find. I used Bolts Plus. They're a very good supplier. And so let me show you now what it looks like on the bike. After I had the cardboard template ready, I laid down the sheet of MDF and put the template on top of it, and then put down masking tape and traced the outline of the cardboard onto the polyethylene sheet, and then made the cuts using a table saw. I had a jigsaw available also, but it turned out I didn't need it. And once I had the cuts done and put score lines with a Dremel for where I wanted bends, and to also show the outside edges of the frame rails, then I did some preliminary bending. once I had that piece mostly ready, I bolted it onto the front of the bike and then put it up on the center stand so that it would conform to the shape of the bike frame itself. And then in order to locate the hole for the rear mount, what I did is I put a piece of masking tape across and moved it to where it seemed to line up side to side with the hole for the rear screw. And once I had done that, I put a piece of wire through it to see how much I would need to move the hole, a very small hole, to line up exactly with the hole for the frame. And as it turned out, I was lucky and it was exactly in the right place. So all I did was enlarge the hole to then accept the screw. So here is the finished product. It fits very well, as you'd expect for it to be custom formed to the bike itself. Nice and protective. Everything's covered. And I'm quite happy with it. It's flexible enough where it needs to be, but very strong, and it has the greatest sliding ability of any material. So much higher than high density polyethylene, even more so than low density polyethylene, and more than olefin or polyurethane or any of those, but also very strong. Once it's been formed with heat for the thermoplastic properties of it, it stays put. It's not going to change, and I'm quite happy with it. I think some of that do-it-yourself kind of aesthetic to it might not appeal to some people. I think maybe a particular riding buddy of mine with an orange Garage Queen bike might not want something homemade like this, but for me it's just what I was looking for. So, no ride cut short from a damaged radiator hose, no more damage to the shock or linkage, and also at the top it's covered so that I don't have mud getting in there. So I'm quite happy with this. Relatively easy, not very expensive, and I had it right away, faster than it would have taken to get something by mail order and shipped to me, and nobody had anything in stock that would be remotely like this locally, so I'm very happy with this. Okay, hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or anything, put them in the comments below and I'll try my best to answer them.